Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. As the days passed, Evelyn began to settle into a routine at Thorncliff, though it was a fragile, uneasy routine at best. By day, she assisted Silas Hale with the mundane tasks of lighthouse keeping, polishing the brass fixtures until they gleamed, trimming the wicks of the lamps to ensure a steady, unwavering flame, and keeping the great glass lens that crowned the tower spotless and clear. Yet, despite her best efforts to make herself useful and to ingratiate herself into this isolated world, she found the lighthouse keeper to be as unyielding and inscrutable as the rocky isle itself. Silas spoke only when necessary, offering little more than grunted instructions or the occasional nod of approval. His icy demeanor left Evelyn feeling like an intruder in this desolate place. No matter how hard she tried to carve out a space for herself, she couldn't help but wonder what shadows lurked in the man's past, what sorrows had etched such deep lines upon his weathered face, and what had stolen the light from his stormy gray eyes. At times, Evelyn would find herself staring at the lighthouse keeper as he went about his duties, studying the harsh planes of his face, the tightness in his jaw, searching for some hint of the emotions that surely must lie beneath that stoic exterior. But Silas remained stubbornly, almost unnaturally, composed, revealing nothing of the turmoil she sensed swirling beneath the surface. It was during these quiet, pensive moments that Evelyn was most acutely aware of the isolation that surrounded them. The cottage, for all its sturdy construction, felt small and confining, a mere speck of habitation in the vast, unforgiving expanse of sea and sky. And beyond its walls lay the lighthouse, a solitary sentinel standing watch over the treacherous waters, its flickering beacon a siren call to ships that dared to venture too close. But it was the nights that truly tested Evelyn's resolve, threatening to unravel the fragile composure she worked so hard to maintain during the day. Strange, unsettling noises would plague her sleep, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of her small, Spartan chamber, phantom footsteps creaking on the stairs leading down to the cottage's main floor, and once, most disturbingly, what sounded like a woman's muffled cry in the darkness. Evelyn would lie awake for hours, clutching the musty, woolen quilt to her chin, straining her ears for any hint of movement beyond the howling of the wind and the relentless crashing of the waves against the rocky shore. On more than one occasion, she had been tempted to descend the stairs and confront Silas, to demand an explanation for the ghostly disturbances that plagued her nights. But something in the lighthouse keeper's ominous warning about the lighthouse's secrets held her back, filling her with a deep, primal fear. What could possibly lurk within those towering walls, she wondered, that would inspire such a stark, unyielding prohibition? What unspeakable horrors had Silas experienced, or perhaps witnessed, that made him so adamant about restricting access to the very heart of Thorncliff? The questions tormented her, whispering in the darkness, driving her to the brink of madness. One particularly stormy evening, while Silas was occupied with his duties in the lighthouse tower, Evelyn's curiosity finally got the better of her. She began exploring the cottage more thoroughly, running her fingers along the rough-hewn stone walls, searching for, she wasn't sure what. Perhaps some clue, some answers to the mystery that had taken hold of her thoughts and refused to relinquish its grip. As she made her way through the sparse but meticulously maintained rooms, Evelyn couldn't help but notice the distinct lack of any personal effects or mementos. Save for the books lining the shelves and the few pieces of sturdy, utilitarian furniture, the cottage was devoid of any signs of life. No photographs, no trinkets, no evidence that this had once been a true home to someone. The realization only heightened Evelyn's sense of unease. What had happened here, she wondered, to strip away any semblance of warmth or personality? Where were the traces of the woman who had once shared this lonely existence with Silas, the woman whose name was inscribed upon the journal Evelyn had discovered? It was in the parlor that Evelyn's questing fingers finally found their prize. As she ran her hand along the rough stone, she felt a slight give in one of the blocks, and with a gentle push, it shifted, revealing a hidden compartment within the wall. Evelyn's heart quickened as she reached inside, her fingers closing around a bundle of old letters and a tattered leather-bound journal. The name inscribed on the journal's cover and faded, Spidery script made her gasp. Charlotte Hale, Silas's wife, whom he had mentioned only once in passing as having passed on from this world years ago. Evelyn knew she should simply replace the items and pretend she had never found them, that she had not stumbled upon this trove of secrets. And yet, the mystery that had been gnawing at her since her arrival, the questions that had plagued her waking hours and haunted her dreams, demanded answers. With trembling hands, she opened the journal and began to read. The entries started cheerfully enough, detailing Charlotte's excitement and optimism as she embarked on this new chapter of her life, coming to Thorncliff as a bride. But as Evelyn turned the aged pages, the tone of the writing changed, becoming increasingly unsettled, tinged with a growing sense of unease. Charlotte wrote of strange occurrences, unexplained noises in the night, whispers that seemed to call to her from the lighthouse, and an ever-present feeling of being watched, even in the safety of her own home. Most troubling of all, she expressed a deepening fear, not of the lighthouse or the island itself, but of Silas, her own husband. The final entry in the journal chilled Evelyn to the bone. I know now what must be done. The truth of Thorncliff can no longer remain hidden. If I do not return from the lighthouse tonight, let it be known that a crash of thunder, loud enough to rattle the very windows, made Evelyn jump, the journal slipping from her trembling hands. She looked up, her blood turning to ice as she saw Silas standing in the doorway, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and something else. Fear, perhaps, or even desperation. "What have you done?" he growled, advancing into the room, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, clutching Charlotte's journal to her chest as if it could somehow shield her from the tempest of emotion emanating from the lighthouse keeper. "Mr. Hale, I can explain," she stammered, her voice betraying the anxiety that gripped her. But as Silas came closer, his expression softened, the anger and accusations bleeding away, replaced by a weariness that seemed to age him a decade in the span of a heartbeat. He sank into one of the chairs by the hearth, his head falling into his hands. "No, Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice soft and laced with defeat. "It is I who must explain. It's time you knew the truth about Thorncliff, about Charlotte, and about me." Evelyn listened, her heart pounding, as Silas recounted the tragic tale of his life at the lighthouse. A story of love, madness, and a darkness that refused to be extinguished, even in death. The wind howled outside, as if the very elements themselves were bearing witness to this revelation of Thorncliff's dark secrets. Evelyn found herself gripping the journal tightly, her knuckles white, as Silas's words painted a haunting picture of the past. "We were happy here, for a time," Silas began, his gaze distant with memories. "Charlotte loved the wildness of this place, the isolation. She said it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But as the months passed, something had changed, a subtle shift in his wife's demeanor that Silas had initially dismissed as merely the effects of their solitary existence. Charlotte became restless, claiming to hear voices calling to her from the lighthouse. Silas continued, his voice tinged with a sorrow so profound that Evelyn felt her heart constrict in sympathy. "I thought she was merely succumbing to the loneliness, the constant howl of the wind. I never imagined." He trailed off, shaking his head, the lines on his face deepening. "One night, during the worst storm I'd ever seen, I woke to find Charlotte gone from our bed. I knew where she'd gone. I raced to the lighthouse, fighting against the wind and rain." Silas paused, his hands trembling slightly as he reached up to rub at the jagged scar on his temple. "I found her at the top, standing by the great lens, her nightgown plastered to her skin, eyes wild and unfocused. She babbled about a ghostly woman in the light, calling to the ships, luring them to their doom on Thorncliff's jagged shores." Evelyn listened, horror dawning on her as the tragic tale unfolded. "But Mr. Hale, surely you don't believe?" Her words were cut short by a sudden flicker in the lights. Both she and Silas turned to look out the window, where the powerful beam of the lighthouse lamp was pulsing erratically, as if possessed by some unseen force. Silas leapt to his feet, fear etched across his features. "No," he breathed. the word little more than a whispered plea. Not again. Without another word, he rushed out of the cottage, heading for the lighthouse. Evelyn, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, found herself following close behind, her mind racing with the implications of Silas's story and the ominous warning it held. As they neared the base of the towering structure, Silas turned to Evelyn, his expression desperate. "Miss Blackwood, I beg you, return to the cottage. It's not safe here." But Evelyn stood her ground, squaring her shoulders. "No, Mr. Hale. Whatever secrets this place holds, I'm a part of them now. I'm coming with you." For a moment, it seemed Silas would argue, but another ominous flicker from above spurred him into action. They entered the lighthouse and began the long climb up the winding staircase, the air growing colder and more charged with each step. As they ascended, Evelyn became increasingly aware of a strange, haunting sound rising above the howling of the storm. A melody, ethereal and beautiful, yet tinged with a malevolence that sent shivers down her spine. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, drawing her forward with a siren's call. They burst into the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse, and Evelyn's world tilted on its axis. There, by the great lens, stood not one spectral figure, but two. One she recognized from the locket, Charlotte, Silas's wife, her form translucent and shimmering. But next to her was another woman, older, with a cruel twist to her lips and a malevolent gleam in her eye. "Charlotte," Silas breathed, his voice a mixture of longing and fear. The ghost of Charlotte turned, her eyes wide with the same terror Evelyn had seen in the locket. "Silas," she cried, her voice echoing strangely. "You must stop her. She's calling the ships to their doom." The older ghost laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Foolish girl," she sneered. "The ships are ours to take, as they have always been." Evelyn's mind raced, putting the pieces together. "You're Silas's grandmother," she gasped. "The original keeper." The malevolent spirit turned her gaze on Evelyn, and the young woman felt as though ice water had been poured down her spine. "Clever little thing," the ghost hissed. "But too late. The ship approaches." True to her word, a vessel appeared on the horizon, heading straight for the treacherous rocks that surrounded Thorncliff. The siren song grew louder, and Evelyn watched in horror as the ship adjusted its course, drawing ever closer to its doom.